And all of a sudden, this fish sees this fish acting like a feeding fish, and he's like, "Where's the food?" Because they're very like their instincts are honed into being opportunistic. The way they survive is by taking advantage of every feeding opportunity possible, because they don't know when the next one's coming. Things can change, conditions change. So they are built to take advantage of every feeding opportunity. And when they see another fish acting like a feeding fish, it makes them go more on the hunt, more aggressive. And how many times have you pulled a bait up and seen other fish chasing them, trying to take it out of their mouth? I've actually caught 2 at a time, and I saw, because it happened on the surface, where one of the coolest moments I've ever seen. It actually is the moment that created this YouTube channel. So, story time. Y'all ready for story time?
That's story time.
Squirrel.
You caught 6 fish on a crankbait.
Squirrel, we're going to chase
at one time.
No. That would be really cool. The odds of that are not great. So, anyways, I'm fishing a glide bait in the fall period. This was not before I started. I was a part-time guy. It was like right when I first started. It was that first fall. And I was on a great glide bait bite. Like, it was like I was fishing later in the day. I was starting later and fishing till dark. And like the last 45 minutes to an hour of the day, I had this one grass flat that they would pull up on every evening, and I'd go catch them on a glide bait. And every time you set the hook, it was usually over 5 or 6 pounds. It was awesome. One of the best bites I've ever experienced in my life. And about I think it was the third weekend in a row that I had taken this guy out, because he had to keep cutting. Once you see what goes down that last hour, like, he was like, I'm coming again. When you next, yeah, I'm coming then. And so we're out there, and right at the end of the day, and he's a buddy, and he's wanting me, I'm fishing with him, and I throw out there, and I'm reeling this glide bait in, and I twitch it twice, and I hook up, and it's a big, and it ends up being like a 7-pounder. And I'm got this big swim bait rod, and I'm doing what you do, keeping him under control, hold the rod down, reel it, horse it fast you can. The fish comes to the surface, mouthful of water, perfect. He's shaking, but he can't go anywhere, Well, as I'm reeling him across the surface, a 4-pounder comes busting out of the water, hits him in the face, trying to steal this glide bait, and gets hooked up. And now I've got both of them. They're like helicoptering on the surface, right, doing this, fighting each other, and I'm freaking out, and the guy with me's freaking out. He gets the net, and as the net goes under these 2 fish, the 7-pounder falls off into the net. We still got both of them, but yeah, so it was just an incredible moment. A 7-pounder and a 4-pounder on one glide bait at one time. They actually broke the glide bait. They pulled on it so hard, there was so much weight there in the joint of the glide bait, it created a little hairline crack. The next day when I was throwing the glide bait, it started sinking after I've been throwing it for an hour. I had a little hairline, it took on water. So anyways, that's just a cool story. It's one of my favorites, so I want to tell it. But all that just to say that those fish, obviously, like, I visually have seen these fish hitting each other in the face trying to take baits from each other. So what David is saying about, yeah, if you don't go without a bite, if you go without a bite and you've been catching them on a swim bait or a chatterbait, slow down with that drop shot of that wacky worm. Get another one to bite, and then if they start biting a little faster, maybe pick your moving bait back up.
That's right.
And catch them faster.
Texas rig now, in this time of the year, is really a good go-to bait.
It sure is. Now,
money. It's a money.
What kind of plastic are you throwing on your Texas rig?
What kind of plastic? I'll use...
Like just a regular worm, or what are we throwing?
Well, I mean, it varies, but I'll use a brush hog, a baby brush hog, or I'll use just a small, like a 7-inch worm, because I'm going for the unders.
That's it, 7-inch worm.
I'm going for the unders.
So I'm glad you said 7-inch worm, because that's what I was hoping you would say, because I don't know what it is. Like, how many people just throw a regular old 7-inch power worm anymore? Like, ever. Like, not very many people still throw that, and certainly not throughout the year. They don't throw it. But I'm here to tell you guys, for whatever reason, this time of year, every year on Lake Fork, they will absolutely, in big numbers, eat a 7-inch ribbon tail worm. Like, every year.
Yeah. And I also put, I'll have a speed worm, the Ultra Vibe speed worm. I'll usually try it. And then Rage makes a cutter worm that I'll use it also. I want something that has a tail that's going to kick pretty hard, especially when I'm moving it through off of, say, pulling it off of vegetation, and it falls. I want that tail to have a little motion going down, so that when that bait noses into the bottom, that tail was kicking, and then it'll pause for a second. And a lot of times underneath that vegetation is where these fish are. Now, I'll tell you, I know that they're coming from underneath that vegetation is because they're dark. Every one of these fish are almost black, have a real dark back, and they're out of the sunshine. And so this has happened a lot here in the past 3 or 4 days. So they're coming from under the vegetation out and hitting that. So I know that that's where they're at. And they're literally, really only in that deep of water, but they're hidden away from the sunshine.
Yeah. That's good stuff, man. I tell you what, this ought to be a great tournament coming next week because there's a lot of 15 and 3/4 inch fish that are feeding right now. Like a lot of them. I mean, we didn't fish that long today. I was filming today, and our actual real fishing time was probably only 2.5 to 3 hours because we did a bunch of other filming stuff. Right? We did instructional content, talking segments, blah blah. There's a lot more that goes into making those videos than meets the eye. So we only actually fished actual fishing time for about 2.5, 3 hours a day, and we had 3 for sure, like perfect. Like there was one that you can't get any closer to 16 than that fish was, and I don't even ever target those. But I went out with Cody today, and we kind of tried to target. So I'm a guy that doesn't really do that ever, but Cody does. And went out trying to target those fish, and we caught those, and we caught one that was over 23 inches. So we almost had an over to go with in just a few hours. So it should be a great tournament. Today, it was a chatterbait. Like I said earlier, we're using chatterbaits, little swim baits, and lipless crankbaits for our moving baits. And then for me, I've also got kind of a trifecta of slow down finesse baits. So I've got a drop shot, I've got a wacky worm, and then I've got a weightless Texas rigged stick bait, the clout stick bait. It's like a Senko 6-cent clout stick bait. And what we referred to earlier, being efficient in cover is why I'm using those 3 baits. I can throw the swim bait anywhere. I can throw that lipless crankbait and that chatterbait around grass, vegetation, stuff like that. Same deal, same deal with the 3 finesse baits, the drop shot, the wacky worm, and the weightless stick bait. So the drop shot I can throw around timber, docks, any kind of cover like that, open water, and it's probably the best bait to get bit in that situation. When I get around a bunch of grass, well, then a wacky worm comes into play. And if the grass is real thick, that weightless stick bait is the deal because it can slide through that grass even better than a wacky worm can.
Yep. And also, too, this time of the year, it's critical, and this is really critical, too, that if you're getting into that shallow bite, and especially if the lake's turning over, the deep bite is a struggle. It's going to be a struggle.
There's just not a lot out there right now.
So when a cold front comes in, what ends up happening is that too many people will stay in that 1 to 3 foot range, and they just can't get bit because whenever the pressure goes up on these cold front days, high pressure, those fish that are in that range, for some reason, especially if the surface temp, will always warm faster or cool faster in that 1 to 3 foot of water. All right, and so what ends up happening is those fish move, they back out, and so all they're doing is that they're going to be between 4 and 10 foot. They're not going any further than that, but they may relocate to the nearest point, but they're going to be in that depth range right there if they're not up against the bank. And then weird thing about a cold front is in the afternoon, late in the afternoon, then all of a sudden they'll come right back up to that 1 to 3 foot. Their bodies, for some reason, acclimate, and I've seen it countless numbers of times where I was catching them right there in 2, 3 foot of water. Now all of a sudden, late in the day, they come right back up, especially if you've got sunshine.
And to me, the cold front effects get worse the cooler the water gets.
Exactly.
Like right now, the cold front effects almost are a good thing.
Yes.
Like majority of it is good. Maybe if you get super post frontal, it'll shut them down a little bit and do what David's talking about. But then as the water starts to get down into the lower 70s and maybe starts to touch the 60s, now the cold front effects become an issue, a real issue, especially as we get into the 60s. So you'll have a little bit of that adverse effect when the water's 80, when that all of a sudden you get that cold front, you get post frontal. But it's not nearly as much negative when the water's, is that, you find the same thing?
Well, it's the temperature drop. If that thing drops, and that's what you pay most attention to. Like you said, cold front comes through and the temps don't drop that drastically, the bite's not going to be affected, especially shallow, that much. But if it does drop, and I've seen it before, 6 or 7 degrees in a 2-day window, and then all of a sudden those fish are not even close to being where they were, they're just going to be backed out. So they're not going to run out into 35 foot of water, they're just going to pull back to the next break line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is the definition.
Does anybody have any questions? I know we haven't really, between me and David, it's hard to get a word in edgewise. But yeah, we love to answer y'all's questions. So somebody come up with something to ask me. Y'all want to know what color underwear David wears?
For those, for those guys that are going to fish the tournament, though, I definitely would pay attention to that, to your bank vegetation. Every pocket on this lake, every cove, every big major creek has bank vegetation. And
That's
so
true.
it's how you pay attention to that bank vegetation, whether it's in a drain, on a point, whatever the case. If the vegetation makes its own point our own little ditch. That corner, it's a
Yes.
pattern within a pattern. And you focus today a bunch of times. I took that wacky worm and there'd be the weed line would end up making a little point right there, and I'd really throw a lot of cast around where that point was on it. So a pattern within a pattern.
There's been a lot of fish on docks lately too.
The
A lot
fall
of fish on docks.
is a great time for docks also. I've spent some time already just in the past 3 days working on some docks, and the cooler that water gets, the docks get even better and better and better.
Yeah, and to me, man, those docks, as those fish make that summer to fall transition and they start moving around, those docks just serve. It's hard when those fish get spread out to find a group of them. We talked about this 2 weeks ago at this seminar, but it's hard as those fish spread out in this transition to find a group of them. And a dock is just a great place for a few fish to stop on and actually get a little group of them in one spot. Because as a fish is moving in down a bank line or whatever, that dock kind of creates a little temporary home and something to hold some bait fish, hold some bluegill, hold some shad, shade lines when the sun comes out, all that good stuff. And it really creates an opportunity. A dock in the right place as they're transitioning in or out of a pocket or creek can really create an opportunity for those fish to get grouped up when they're really not that grouped up. So it's good.
And it doesn't hurt to have some brush on a dock.
Boy, I'm telling you. We got a lot of them out here with brush on it, that's for sure. Yeah. Yeah, for sure you need to have more than just a dock there. You can't just go randomly dock fishing. That's dock fishing in general. It doesn't even matter what lake you're on. I grew up on Lake Conroe, full of docks. And dock fishing in general, you have to understand that there's got to be more to the dock than that. It's like going to Gunnersville that's got 37 miles grass line. Well, that whole grass line's not going to hold fish. There's got to be something else there. There's got to be a bottom contour change, a point, a hump, a creek channel bend up against it. Same thing with these docks. A dock on a point with steep drop on one side, a dock on a ledge, a dock on a creek bend with a creek swinging right up to it. All that is something that's going to add to that dock. And then, especially if you can add brush into that factor, have some bottom contour, some structure, add some cover, some brush, and you've got that dock, and it's in the right position of the creek for where the fish are moving at. At that point, that dock is virtual guaranteed to hold multiple fish.
And I won't pass up an isolated dock.
Yes.
Never.
In a lake full of docks, and we're not just slap full of docks, but areas of this lake are full of docks.
Yeah.
In a lake full of docks, an isolated dock is special.
And that term can be used not only with docks, but with anything.
Very
an
true.
isolated tree, an isolated clump of reeds,
Yes.
an isolated anything. If it's by itself on any kind of bank line or anywhere, no matter where you're at, it's worth throwing at just because it's different and it's by itself.
Yep, absolutely. All right, somebody ask a question now.
Somebody's got to have a good question.
Somebody ask a question. Bryce,
Need a phone in.
you get, Bryce, you gonna ask a question?
I take it the
He's
lake's
probably
changed
going-
in the last 19 years.
This
In the last 19 years?
drastically in 19
Every
years.
every lake will change in 19
I
years.
remember a day here when this lake was solid hydrilla,
Yeah.
all the way around it. And this time of the year, you could flip that grass with a 1 ounce jig, and I mean, 35 pounds every day was it was nothing to do, So
It's been 19 years since I've been on this
Is that right? What brought you back?
list. Tired of working.
I don't blame you there, brother.
We're from Houston,
Oh, okay.
and I live 15 minutes from Conroe.
Oh, really? What town y'all in?
Well, I'm in. Actually, I'm in Conroe,
Okay.
but I'm in Shenandoah.
Okay. I graduated from Oak Ridge High School,
Okay.
right across the street from you, right across the highway. That's small world.
Yeah.
Small world.
But used to fit. Conroe was the same way though years ago.
Oh, yeah.
When they had hydrilla.
Woo.
You could go
So
anywhere.
I'm just old enough. I wasn't much older than Bryce, but I can barely remember Lake Conroe with grass in it, and it was a whole different ball game.
And then they went in there and killed it.
They stocked 18 million grass carp in there with all the house development and all that. Yeah, they went in there and what they did was they overstocked the grass carp, and they were supposed to stock enough grass carp in there to kind of manage the grass. And I guess they had the science wrong because they stocked way too many, and the grass disappeared in a half a year. I mean, talking about, I don't know, Conroe's about what, 20,000 acres or so? something like that. And I'm talking about 20,000 acre lake choked full of hydrilla. 6 months, not a stitch.
The word
Not a
was
stitch.
that the Texas Parks and Wildlife put in grass carp that were
Triploid grass carp. They can't
Sterile.
reproduce,
they can't reproduce.
but they
Well,
did
the homeowners
because
got
they're still
word
there.
what was doing it, so they go out and buy their own.
Oh, is that what happened?
No
Yes.
way.
The homeowners, it wasn't getting rid of quick enough, so a lot of the homeowners got together, went out and bought a bunch of them that reproduced.
No.
And there's still a bunch of grass
And
carp in
there's
Lake
still-
Conroe to this day. And it's a shame because Lake Conroe is one of those lakes. It's not nearly as storied or as productive as Lake Fork has been. But man, there is some giant fish in Lake Conroe, and there always has been. There
Yeah.
always has been. But man, you talk about like we talk about it out here, how you can come out here and it's like sometimes it feels like they're in a fishing lake. Conroe's even worse. You can go out there and fish everything you can imagine and can't buy a bite sometimes for days or a week at a time. It's just Conroe can be insanely tough, and there is not enough that we can say for what good hydrilla or any underwater vegetation for that matter, but hydrilla is the best. But hydrilla, coontail, milfoil, all that stuff, it does so much for a fishery, and it starts at the baseline of allowing the bait fish to thrive and also allowing the bass offspring, the fry, to thrive. It gives them a place to hide. It gives them oxygen, makes them more healthy. They've got algae over every grass stem they look at. They've got unlimited food at their base life form at this big. And it just gets everything such a great start. Any lake that you go to that has been full of hydrilla for a long time, I promise you nobody struggles to get bites on that lake. Lake Welsh is like, how big is Lake Welsh? 2,000 1,300 acres.
1277 to be exact.
Lake Welsh is 1,277 acres. And there might sometimes be 40 or 50 boats on that 1,200 acre lake, and nobody zeros
Yeah.
because it's had hydrilla out to 12 foot in it for all these years. And those bass just reproduce and thrive in there. Hey, and you can't blame it on the hot water factor of Welsh because you can go down. There's a little lake down in South Texas right now. Man, the name's slipping my mind right now. There's a small lake between San Antonio and Falcon, Choke Canyon, that the grass has just come back. It was real low in the drought 2000, but the grass has come back. Lake filled back up, grass has come back. And all the Falcon guides that are Falcon guides are spending a lot of time on Choke Canyon because they can fill that whole lake full of boats and everybody's catching a lot of fish. I mean, a lot of fish. Anytime a lake is just chock full of hydrilla for years at a time, there is no such thing as tough bites. Like, there's just so many fish in them.
I ran into a guy down there at Choke Canyon. I said, man, I wish we had a lake like this around Houston. He said, y'all did. Y'all screwed it up.
Yeah.
Was his name Scott Springer?
He was talking about Conroe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got
Hey,
rid of the hydrilla.
maybe the best lake in the country the last couple of years has been Sam Rayburn, right? The last 2-3 years, Sam
Yeah.
Rayburn might be the best lake in the whole country.
And I'm going there in 3 weeks.
I'm probably going to tag along. I don't know. Whoever I've got booked in 3 weeks, we're going to have to head south. No. But the deal with Rayburn was it got low in the drought in 2011 like everywhere else, and they even had some other problems. But the mounts of hydrilla have made a drastic return. The hydrilla out to 8-9 foot of water in big areas. You know, Sam Rayburn's such a big, huge 120,000 acre lake. But the offshore hydrilla, the big amounts, the big giant, creek arms full of hydrilla have made a return. And then all of a sudden now Sam Rayburn, 5 years ago, Sam Rayburn was still a good lake that you can catch a big bass out of, but it wasn't nearly as productive. You looked at the tournament results, it was like, well, this guy caught them, but everybody else struggled. Now it's not like that. Now it's maybe the best lake in the country. And what does it have to do with? 100% it's the grass. It's the grass. It's the hydrilla and coontail, man. It's when you can get that hydrilla and coontail to grow out into at least some mid-range depths, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 foot, and stay there for a few years at a time, it makes everybody's life a lot better as a bass fisherman.
Lake fluctuations is what really hurts hydrilla.
It can
And
kill it.
last year we fished a tournament there in March, and the lake was 12 foot over pool. When a lot of rain comes up like that, then what it does is denies the
Sunlight
grass
limits it.
sunlight, which it needs to continue to grow. And so the grass started to slowly die back. But what happens is they got the gates wide open. They dumped a lot of the water out. Well, the water took a while for it to come back down, but then it has the seeds. The bed, I guess, still has the hydrilla there. And then when they got down low enough to re-get sunshine, then it started to grow back.
Yep, absolutely. And, you know, going back to the 2011 drought, this lake got to an all-time low, and there was something else that happened while the lake was super low. And everybody back in the day, and this was, I moved here in 2009, so this was when I was first here and kind of hearing all the rumor mill, and everybody talked about, man, they killed all the grass, Texas Parks and Wildlife killed all the grass. Well, actually, with Lake Fork, Texas Parks and Wildlife did not spray at that time. Texas Parks and Wildlife had nothing to do, because it wasn't like the 90s, but we had a lot of hydrilla in this lake in 2008, 2009, 2010. As the lake continued to drop in that drought, it got down to 7 3/4 foot low to be exact. That was the all-time low. At that low depth, okay, we had hydrilla out to 8, 9 foot. Well, now if you drop the lake that much, you've only got a hydrilla in a couple feet of water at best. At best. That winter, we had 3 consecutive days that never got above freezing for a high. We never got above freezing during the daytime for a high. Well, what happens every year in the wintertime is shallow grass dies, and you need the deeper grass to sustain the grass growth in the spring when it comes back, because the tops of the hydrilla and the bank line hydrilla will die when the water temps get that cold. When the water starts getting down at 40 degrees, 38 degrees, stuff like that, that hydrilla is going to die back. We see it every year with the grass that we do have. The top gets knocked off, the stuff on the bank goes away, and you've got this kind of a little bit off the bank hydrilla that's in 4, 5, 6 foot of water. It'll survive, but that other stuff won't. Well, when you've only got hydrilla in 2 foot of water, and then you get a cold winter and 3 of those days are below freezing, it kills all the shallow grass, and now there's nothing. And then the lake starts to come back up a couple years later, and there's no grass. There's just no grass.
I remember.
And it would come back a little bit, and then the lake would rise, and what David was talking about would happen. So it'd come back a little bit, lake would rise, and then that stuff would die. And then it'd come back a little bit, lake would rise, and then that stuff would die. You know, it went through a process until we got all the way full. We really didn't get enough grass back in the lake to do anything.
That time you're talking about, I remember, so the coldest I've ever seen was in a pocket or something where that grass was, and 37-degree water.
That's I've only seen 38. Yeah,
37 is the
yeah.
lowest I've ever seen, and I've never seen it again since. Matter of fact, it's rare. I mean, to even have it below 45 now. I haven't seen anything below 45, but
I've only seen 38 twice ever in Texas.
but that was cold.
Yeah.
For water.
Sure was. Anybody got any more questions?
I got just FYI for those. Normally, because we got the Big Bass Flash next weekend. Normally, I don't know about you, but normally we're booked all the way through next week. This is the first year that I've got a couple of days open next week.
Oh, wow.
Which is odd
Well-
for this time of the year. So just FYI.
Yeah, if anybody wants to get out, hey, David is one of the better tournament fishermen out here in his own right and always has been. So if any of y'all are going to fish next weekend at the tournament, or if any of you guys out there watching in the YouTube world are going to fish the Sealy Outdoors Big Bass Splash, call us. You can even just email us at Your Lake Fork Guide, and we'll get you set up with David.
Unders.
Unders, that's right, baby.
Unders.
This isn't really an underbait, but this is a cool bait, man. I've been fortunate enough. I've had this bait since the spring, and until I ran out, but I just got some more in. But I don't know how many people know about this bait. This is called a ridge worm. It's 6 cents. It's a new bait. Very innovative. There's a young man named Phil Jones, that works for 6 cents, that all he does is create new bait designs. And a lot of the stuff you see 6 cents come out with that's innovative and unique, it's that guy.
I could see that on a drop shot.
On a drop shot, on a shaky head, huh? I'm telling you, this worm catches them now. It's got this big, long reaper tail. It's a very unique bait,
That's cool looking.
It's a very cool bait, and they bite it. Like, they bite the fire out of it. They had their first run in back in the summer. They sold out very quickly. They just got some back in. These are very hard to get your hands on right now. Extremely difficult. So anything you guys order from sixcentfishing.com, y'all know the drill. Order it up at sixcentfishing.com. Use the code Your Lake Fork Guide on the checkout screen. That'll get you 10% discount. But tonight we're going to give away a package of these.
How do I enter?
I planned it out because we're fixing to make it up right now on the fly. We usually do trivia. But I'm not gonna do trivia, and I may make some of y'all mad, but that's okay. Y'all won't be the first ones or the last ones to be frustrated with me. One of my favorite things, parts about guiding, one of my favorite things about fishing is getting young guys that are passionate about the sport in my boat. I absolutely love it. One of the biggest fish I've ever caught was caught by a 13-year-old, or one of the biggest fish my customers ever caught, I should say, was caught by a 13-year-old. And that's probably my favorite moment as a fishing guide. And I absolutely love getting the guys in the boat that are hungry and want to learn, the guys that are passionate about it. They want to tournament fish. They want to compete. They want to be the best fishermen they can, because it reminds me of me, only back then it wasn't clear what the avenue was to be able to do this for a living. And now these young guys have some opportunities that they can see. And so a lot of these guys, they're getting after it. And there's one in the room tonight. And I've talked to him a few times, and him and his dad, they got a camper right over here, and they've just been awesome. And I've had some conversations with him, and I know he's that way. So, sorry for all the rest of you old farts in here. But here you go, brother. Take these out and go catch them.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Sucks to be old.
That's right. But man, no, I appreciate you guys coming up here like y'all do, and y'all have always been super nice to me, and I sure appreciate it. So, any more questions? Don't want to leave anything unanswered. If y'all got anything at all.
Any more baits?
No more baits. I only brought. No, the rest of them are for me. Actually, you can get some more. You got to call yourlakeforkguide.com and book a trip with Billy
I'm going to
Lawson.
be looking in his boat for a pack of green pumpkin like that.
They don't sell
That's
those.
the only color they have.
That's the only color they have right now, and they have some down the road.
What's the length on that?
I saw your truck today.
8 inches?
They still in there?
About 8, somewhere there maybe.
Let me see.
Man, I could really use a 6-inch version of that. Ooh, I could see that on
Well,
a drop
dude,
shot.
that little bitty hook that you use, just take off some of the head.
Well, but I mean, it's actually that's pretty. That's got to be at
Like
least
if you
8
took
inch.
the head down to here, especially.
Yeah,
would
because
be
that
all
tail, in that whenever you get down into that deal with water current, is going to make that thing just move all over the place like that, and that's going to be a real good attractant.
Good catch. I took a weird turn on it. That's a good catch.
That's pretty good.
All right. Well, hey, man, thank y'all so much for joining us. We always appreciate Lake Fork Marina for allowing us to do it. And we'll be right back here in 2 weeks. Get to hear all the results of the Big Bass Splash. Y'all go make some money, man.